A moment to be sure that your cell phones have been turned off, and we welcome those of you who are joining us via online. So when the family walks in, I'll ask everyone to rise, then we'll be seated as one community and begin the sacred memorial service. Please be seated. Rabbi Evan Moffick and Cantor J. O'Brien will be officiating.
Birth is a beginning, and death the destination, and life is a journey from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion, then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness, and often back again. From health to sickness, and back we pray to health again. From offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat, to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination, and life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage to life everlasting. These words, which were penned by Rabbi Alvin Fine, really express the Jewish philosophy of life and of death. And they tell us that we come here in grief, profound grief. But we also come here as much as we can with a measure of gratefulness. Grateful that God blessed the world with the life of Don Goldstein. Our Jewish funeral service is fairly simple, consists of some reading, some psalms, some reflections, and concludes with the Kaddish prayer. We'll continue now with the words of the 23rd Psalm. If you know them, please feel free to join me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Adonai Erohu Ninode sheyarbitzeini alemei menuchot yenachaleini nafshi yeshovev yohancheni b'maglei tzedek yohancheni b'maglei tzedek le'man shemo Gam ki yeilech neged salmavet lo irara ki ata imadi shivtecha Shantecha heima yenachamuni Taharoch lefanai shulchan neged zorerai Nishanta Mashem Roshi Kosi Revayai Achtov Vachesed Yedefuni Kol Yemei Chayai Kol Yemei Chayai Nishavti Beveit Adonai Leorech Yomim Adonai Roi Rohechsan Adonai Roi Loechsan
At the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. The rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. At the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember Don Goldstein, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have joy we crave to share, we remember them. As long as we live, Don too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. Now I'd like to invite up several members of the family who will share their memories.
I'd like to share some random thoughts about my father. For those of you that didn't know him well, he loved sports, especially baseball and the Cubs. Also golf. He was an avid tennis player at one time. He was not just a participant, he loved watching. He was also an avid runner, running daily for the bulk of his life. His work life, which actually intersected my own, and he allowed me to come into the family business, a business that he married into, which created a very unique environment within that company. From what I saw, he looked like the backbone of the company, a person that everybody came to talk to for advice, a calming influence in a business with a lot of conflict and activity. He did this and was sympathetic to both employees within the company, vendors, as well as customers. He had excellent mentors, Barney Ecker, Dave Shapiro, and George Newman, mentors that I wish I'd known better. He had relationships and friendships with people in the company and outside of the company. Outside of the company, good friends included Bill Kaufman, Bob Caparelli, Don Kirk, and Tom Coleman. And I also want to mention, if I'm leaving anybody out, it's not intentional. The industry was fraught with conflict, and he somehow, for the most part, managed to stay calm. I don't remember a lot of times in my life, whether at home or at the office, him raising his voice or swearing. He had miscellaneous loves. He loved gardening, although he hated the chipmunks and the deer. A frequent activity of his was to catch the chipmunks in a little cage and then take them and drop them off at the nearest forest preserve. I don't think I'd have that kind of patience. And the deer were constantly into his garden. That was a tougher battle. He loved desserts. We don't have enough time to go into that part, but he loved his desserts, as well as his BMW. Once he found his first BMW, it was his next great love, other than my mother. The house on Crofton that he built, it was a home. It wasn't just a house. Him and my mother built a home, and they entertained there, and they loved to entertain. The thing I think about my father was he was a man of dignity. The way he dressed, he was impeccably dressed. I can't remember how many times I'd show up somewhere and he would be adjusting my jacket or my tie. You can look a little better. But him, always impeccably. And his dignity, that extended to the end of his life when he was dealt a blow very unfair. He never complained. He lived his life the best he could as things were slowly taken away from him. At the end of his life, he could no longer watch sports. He could no longer watch the Cubs or the Bears, although that might have been a blessing. But he handled it well. And he would always say to me, whenever I'd left, whenever I came to visit, "When are you coming back?" And I always wondered every time I left him if this was the last time I would see him. But he was a man that I was truly lucky to have as a father. I can't think of the fact that I'm the one that's blessed.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. It really means a lot to us. I'm Don's youngest daughter, Lori. I want to start my remarks by sharing the iconic bar mitzvah story. My dad's bar mitzvah was scheduled for a Friday evening in January, the month he turned 13. My grandmother, his mother, kept him home from school that day, as the cantor had recommended my dad rest his voice. My grandmother had errands to run, and so she left the house with strict instructions for my dad to stay home and rest. Well, no surprise, my dad eventually got bored. He decided to put on his ice skates and head over to a nearby field that had been frozen over into an ice skating rink. Well, somewhere along the way, he fell and hurt his arm. But it wasn't hurting that much, so he continued skating. Eventually, though, his arm really started to hurt, and so he headed back home. When his mom returned, my dad confessed what had happened, and my grandmother took him to the doctor, who was also a family friend of theirs. Sure enough, my dad's arm was broken. While they were in the office, the phone rang. It was the doctor's wife, who told her husband, "Be sure to get home early. We have Donnie Goldstein's bar mitzvah tonight." To which the doctor replied, "I know, I'm putting his arm in a cast right now." Of course, that incident happened long before I was born. Some of my earliest memories play in my mind like short videos. They often revolve around my dad picking little me up. When I was 5, my parents sent me to Florida to visit my grandparents, flying with friends of theirs both ways. On the return, I remember walking off the plane in a line with the other passengers, and my father's big arms lifting me up and across the stanchion into his arms. Or my dad coming home from a rare out-of-town business trip, and I joyfully ran out to the car, and my smiling dad picked me up and carried me inside. Or falling asleep in the car on the way home from an extended family outing that went late, and my dad carrying me to my bed. I know I was asleep. How could I know that happened? But I just did. I have fond memories of going with my dad to his office every so often on a Saturday morning. And while he worked, I got to run around, eat sweet rolls from the lunchroom, and drink all the soda I wanted from the free pop machine in the warehouse. My dad worked hard and consistently, but he was always home at 6:30 for our family dinner. And whatever stress he might have been feeling at the office, and I have to think there was stress at times, he never brought it home with him, and I never knew about it. One thing, though, my dad did have a tendency for falling asleep. That is to say, taking little cat naps here and there. Most famously in our family, when I had my learner's permit, my dad was the one who took me driving. One day, we were in the car, and I wanted to try merging on the highway. I headed down the highway entrance, glanced over at my dad, and saw him snoozing away. "Dad," I yelled, "wake up, I'm merging on the highway." Fortunately, he snapped to, and we both made it home in one piece. While I was in high school, I spent a couple of summers working at my dad's office. That's when I really started to notice that my dad was just so well liked. And it wasn't just that he was a nice guy, he had a special alchemy of likability that included a good-natured desire to connect with people, along with just a touch of gentleness, and often with a kind of kidding around playfulness thrown in. I don't know for sure if everyone in the office liked my dad, but it sure seemed that way, and it made me proud to be his daughter. One year at Seder, after the afikomen had been found, my dad had afikomen gifts to pass out to the 4 children present. My dad picked up the first wrapped gift in front of him and with that playful smile of his said, "This one is for someone whose name starts with an A." Ashley, Allison, Anna, and Aaron all jumped up excitedly, while the adults burst out laughing. My dad could use his playful sense of humor to break up tense moments. In utero, Zach was taking his time making his arrival into the world. Still pregnant on my due date, we had a delicious dinner at my parents' house. Later that night, I went into labor. My parents arrived at the hospital in the middle of the night to find John walking the halls with me. As I came out of an intense labor contraction, my dad turned to my mom and quipped, "Must have been your cooking." My father's love of cherry pie was well known in the family. One time up in Door County, where my parents spent much of their summers, my parents were shopping for provisions in preparation for the arrival of my family for a long weekend. They were at Mrs. Kepsel's, the legendary pie purveyor, where my mom picked out an apple pie. My dad said, "Why are you getting apple?" My mom answered, "Apple pie is Justin's favorite." Without missing a beat, my dad said, "What about Andrew? Andrew's favorite is cherry." There were, of course, 2 pies on the table that evening. And so, here's the hardest part of my remarks. My father and my mother endured the most painful experience that parents can have, losing a child. There are many people here that witnessed the devastation to our family when my sister Linda died. Some months after her death, my mom decided she wanted to go visit Linda's grave. This was the summer of '88, and the Chicago area was experiencing a serious drought. When they arrived, they saw brown, dry grass covering the cemetery, except at Linny's grave, which was green and lush. And that's when my mom realized that my dad had been coming to the cemetery every day after work and watering her grave. My parents' grief seemed bottomless for a time, and yet they both learned to go on with their lives. Ashley, it cannot be overstated, your birth, the arrival of their first grandchild, brought immense joy into their lives, followed by the birth of all 5 of their grandchildren. It eases my mind and brings me a measure of joyful peace to think of my dad and Linda reunited in the world beyond. Many people here know that in 2017, my active dad had a severe medical event, an aortic dissection, which put him into an electric wheelchair and it eliminated his ability to do so many of the things he loved. Over those 7 years, many people commented to me how sad it was to see my dad in his current state. For me, though, I always felt that every day we got with my dad after that was a bonus. It was a miracle that my dad survived the 5-hour emergency operation. By all accounts, he came within an inch of dying that August day. And those who have read and understood the minute medical detail of his surgery have told us that the surgeon's actions were nothing less than heroic. I'm grateful for every day that I got to be with, love, and receive love from my dad. I'm reminded of one of John's relatives who, after meeting my parents for the first time, said to me, "Wow, Lori, you really lucked out in the parents department." That is truth.
Hi, I'm John. I have the great honor and pleasure of being Lori's husband and Don's son-in-law. Before I got kicked out of religious school, true story, I remember being told that on the sixth day, God created the people and animals. And these last few days, as I try to imagine that scene, and I think about Don, I picture God in the heavens sprinkling all around the world the best things that make us human: kindness, wisdom, courage, a sense of humor, the capacity to love. And I imagine God came to Don Goldstein and must have thought, you know what? I've got a lot of extra of all these good things. And instead of just a few sprinkles, God kept pouring and pouring and pouring the kindness, the wisdom, the courage, the humor, the great capacity to love, all into this amazing man, Don Goldstein. Anyone who spent more than a few minutes with Don understood how much of these wonderful qualities he possessed. I learned this more than 30 years ago when Lori and I were engaged and went to spend a long weekend with Don and Gail up in Door County. Lori and Gail went up a day early to go shopping. They like to do that. And I was told to ride up with Don. I'll admit, I was nervous. The idea of 4.5 hours in a car with my future father-in-law, who I didn't really know that well yet, felt daunting. But what I thought might be a long, awkward ride turned into a life lesson that I will always treasure. As Don drove down the tri-state, we came to our first toll booth. Yes, those were the days before iPass. Don opened the window, and as he handed his change to the attendant, he managed to share just a quick little joke and a kind word, and the attendant smiled. Same thing at the next toll booth, and when we stopped for gas, and when we stopped for burgers near Sheboygan. From Highland Park all the way to Egg Harbor, he made the effort to make the lives of these people, whom he would likely never meet again, just a bit more pleasant. And I realized that my future father-in-law was giving me a master class in how to be a mensch. They say that acts of kindness create ripples of goodness throughout the world. Don created waves of goodness. I never once saw him have a negative interaction with anyone, not once. Don enjoyed many things in life, as you've heard: golf, tennis, running marathons, travel, the Cubs, desserts, lots and lots of desserts. And then came these last 7 excruciatingly difficult years after he suffered through the aortic dissection. Still, he kept his kindness and humor and showed tremendous courage and willpower, even as he went through amputations and lost the use of the lower half of his body, and then much of his hearing, and spent long stretches in hospitals and rehab facilities. Most of us would have complained. I know I would have complained a lot. But through all of it, I never heard Don complain. Not once. Instead, he always asked about other people. As you've heard a little bit, Don was a man of great professional accomplishment. He was chairman of M. Ecker and Company, at one point one of the largest trade subcontractors in the country, that worked on many, many thousands of homes and landmarks around Chicago, such as the Sears Tower, the Hancock Building, Marina Towers, Water Tower Place, and even, for a Cubs fan, the new Comiskey Park. He could have bragged, but instead was much more interested in others, because at his core, Don was fueled by its great capacity to love. He deeply loved Gail, who heroically took care of him, deeply loved his sister Doris, and brother Dave. And Dave, we're all thinking of you. We know you're watching. He deeply loved Michael and Lori and Linda. He deeply loved Ashley and Allison and Justin and Andrew and Zach, and was a perfect grandfather to them. He deeply loved his nephews and nieces and cousins and many, many, many friends he had with whom he kept close relationships. So to sum it up, I'll paraphrase that great moral philosopher, Ringo Starr, and simply say, we loved Don, and Don loved us. Thank you.
When I was 2 years old, I gave my grandfather the name Boppy. I couldn't tell you why, but that was the name that stuck. And once my younger brothers came along, he was Boppy to them too. Boppy was a wonderful grandfather to have as a curious child. There were many days my brothers and I spent with him exploring the Museum of Science and Industry and its endless exhibits. And I remember on a long drive home from my grandparents' house in Door County, Boppy sitting with me in the back seat and explaining the numbering scheme of the interstate highway system. Highways ending in 0 go east-west, highways ending in 5 go north-south, and so on. Boppy was also a wonderful grandfather to have as a child who liked sweets, because if Boppy was eating dessert, then so would we. And of course, Boppy's kindness, gentleness, and sense of humor were an example to us all. I have a few stories to share about Boppy the helper. The first is that as a young child, I got sick on airplanes. Boppy always knew just the right moment to reach for the barf bag, and he would catch every drop, which is more than my parents could say. I was 12 years old when my dad's dad, Grandpa Scoop, passed away. In his last days, my dad, his siblings, and my older cousins were with him in Arizona, and I wanted to go there too to say goodbye. It was Boppy who flew with me to Phoenix, a 6 a.m. flight as I remember. So a few days ago when I got the call, there was no question in my mind that I was getting on the first flight possible to say goodbye to Boppy. For the last 7 years, Boppy's health was not so good, but he never stopped caring about his grandkids. After I started working in housing development, I cherished talking on the phone about his work experience and asking for advice in my job with his mind as sharp as ever. Boppy always loved spending time with his grandkids, and we loved spending time with him.
My enduring memory of Boppy is a smile. It greeted me every time I walked through the door and every time I hugged him to say goodbye. While his words, especially in his last few years, were few and far between, it didn't stop him from giving his love. And it taught me that you don't need to say very many words to express your love for the world around you. I'm lucky to have felt his love and the fortune to carry a smile through eternity.
Gail asked me to read this on behalf of her and the family, so just imagine Gail's voice and not mine. One of our children, I can't remember which one, at around the age of 3 used to say, "I can do it my own self." That's how we want our children to grow up, to be independent and ready when the time comes to be on their own. And so they do. They grow up and find their own way in the world, a life's work and companions to share that life. And as they grow up, we grow older, and we are the ones who get the feeling that I can do it my own self, except that sometimes we can't. That is a hard truth. But if we are lucky, we can ask for help. And if we are even luckier, someone is there to help. Someone who doesn't need to be asked, but who sees what needs to be done and does it. Whether it's a simple thing, like holding open a heavy door so that Don's wheelchair could maneuver through, or someone who patiently waits at an intersection without honking so that Don could slowly get across the street, or a hostess in a restaurant who understands our situation and is able to find a place for us. And so, to all the Metavan drivers who took the time to be sure that Don was safe in the vehicle, to the dining room host at the Mather who made sure there was a place for us, to the culinary staff on the skilled nursing floor who made sure he was offered food that he liked to eat, to the physical therapist who, without being asked, took over the responsibility of seeing that his wheelchair was in working order and that he was safe operating it, and to the many, many, many nurses at the Mather who did more than a job, they became part of our family. And to our friends who so graciously supported us during these last years, for the cards, the phone calls, the visits, the dinners, we cannot thank you enough for accompanying us on our journey. Because, you see, when a certain day comes, much as you may want to, you cannot do it your own self. To quote William Butler Yeats, "Think where man's glory most begins and ends, and say our glory was we had such friends." Thank you on behalf of the family.
There's a discussion in the Talmud, it's in Pirkei Avot, and the rabbis ask this question. They say, "Ezehu derech tova shivchoch ba ha'adam," which means, what's the best way for a person to live, or what's the best quality for somebody to have for a good life? And one rabbi answers, an ayin tova, which means a good eye, okay? Another rabbi answers chaver tov, that's to have a good friend, to be a good friend. And then a third, Rabbi Akiba, is considered the greatest, he says, a lev tov, a good heart. And Rabbi Yochanan, who is adjudicating this discussion, says, I prefer Rabbi Akiba's answer. For if you have a lev tov, a good heart, you also possess every other important quality. And the truth is, Don had an ayin tova, a good eye. He was able to look at life. He had a perspective and see the good in people, the good in situations, the good in circumstances. He had an optimism, a calm, and as we heard, and as Gail told me, never complained. The last 7 years, as we all know, were extremely hard. And whenever I visited, whenever I spoke with him, there was never any complaining. It's truly remarkable. I doubt many of us could have acted in a similar way. Remember the second answer, chaver tov, a good friend, a good neighbor even. That's someone who's fun to be with, who's interesting. And Don was. As we know, he ran 10 marathons, a productive professional life, an extraordinary marriage, someone with many friends, people in the congregation, even people he didn't know well, he would feel a good connection to, as John was saying. He was just a beloved person. But above all, and the foundation of all of this, Don had a lev tov, a good heart. He was kind, he was generous, he was a loving husband, loving father, grandfather, brother. Never raised his voice, always a smile. And you know, Don had a certain look, a kind of contentment. I would sometimes see it when I was with Don and Gail. It's just a true satisfaction in life. You can almost see it in this picture. Maybe that's just the cake that's inspiring in this picture. But it's a truly joyful way of being. And we have Thanksgiving coming up this week, and then a couple weeks we have Hanukkah coming up. And I was thinking about Hanukkah. You know, on Hanukkah, you have the shamash candle. It's the big candle that lights the other candles. And typically, if you want to take the idea of a shamash, you would think a shamash individual, a shamash person, would be someone with a huge personality, big, bold person, the big light lighting all the other lights. That's the shamash. But I think of Don as a different kind of shamash, a leader, but a quiet, dignified, warm leader who lights other candles. He lights up other people, brings joy and harmony and kindness and love to others, but didn't do it in a way that draws attention to himself like you would think a shamash does, but did it in a way that draws attention to others. That was the kind of person Don was, and the kind of legacy that he leaves behind. And in Jewish tradition, the way we honor a loved one, the way we remember them, is by the words, Zichrono Livracha. May his memory be a blessing. These words convey the purpose of a well-lived life, that those who know you, those who come after you, those who remember you, look to your life as a blessing, a benediction, and an inspiration. Being a blessing means that you have touched the lives of those who knew, and that you have helped them to do the same for others. For Gail, for Michael and Lori and Linda and David and his grandchildren, Ashley, Allison, Justin, Andrew, Zachary, his entire extended family, his many, many friends, all those who loved and cared about him and who touched his lives. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. May the memory of Don Goldstein endure among us as an everlasting blessing. God, you give us loved ones, and you make them the strength of our life and the light of our eyes. They depart and leave us bereft on a lonely way, but you are the living fountain from which our healing flows. To you, the stricken look for comfort and the sorrow-laden for consolation. God, we see life as through windows that open on eternity. We see that love endures and the soul endures as you, O God, endure forever. We see that the years are more than grass that withers, more than flowers that fade. They weave a timeless pattern in a world that's a dwelling place of your love and your presence. I'd ask you now, if you're able, to please rise as Cantor J chants for us the El Mole Rachamim prayer.
El Mole Rachamim Shochein Vamiromim Omitzei Menucha Nechona Ta'achat Kanefei HaShechinah Im Mikroshim Uteorim Gezor arakiamos hierim, et nishmo shaloch leolamo, balarachamim. Yostireu beseter kanafov leolamim. Vitzror achayim anishmoto, Adonai hu nachalato, ve'yanuach v'shalom amishkavo, v'nomar
Eternal God, full of compassion, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to our beloved husband, father, grandfather, loved one, friend, Don Goldstein, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and may his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. For you, the eternal God, are his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us all say, Amen. We'll continue now with the words of the Kaddish prayer. It's our primary Jewish prayer of mourning. If you know it, please feel free to join me. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon v'yomechon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'gala uvizman kari v'imru Amen. Yehi shemei Rabbah mivorach leolam olamei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudasha barichu. La'elam min kol birchata v'shirata tushvachata v'nechemata. Damiran bi'alma v'imru Amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. O say shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. May God, the source of peace, send peace to all of us who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved, and let us all say Amen. Just a couple of announcements I'm going to make. The Shiva is this evening from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. and tomorrow evening. Tonight it's at the Mather in Evanston, 425 Davis Street in the Fairfield Room. And just a special announcement, it's not in the packet, but the parking structure will probably be full, so park on the street. And there's plenty of street parking. It's all nearby. And then tomorrow evening, it's at the Goldstein Marshall residence. The address is in here in Wilmette, also from 7 to 9. And if you'd like to make any contributions, you can make them here to Macomb Solel Lakeside, or Jewish Reconstructionist Congregation, JRC, or the ACLU. I believe that's it. There's no, we'll just conclude right after the service. There's no receiving or anything like that, just the Shiva this evening. But to conclude, we have a little bit of a song, a surprise song. This was one of Don's favorites, and he was a person of joy, so I hope this brings some joy and some positive memories.
Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I never get back, for it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
This concludes our service.